I thought I knew my wife. I believed I understood the woman I had shared my life with for 6 years, the woman whose voice filled our quiet evenings and whose presence had slowly become the center of my world. When you live with someone long enough, you begin to believe you know the rhythm of their thoughts, the patterns of their habits, the story behind every silence. That was what I believed about Lisa Peterson. She was warm, attentive, and thoughtful in ways that made life feel stable again after the difficult years that followed my first divorce. I had spent a long time rebuilding my life in Ohio, settling into the calm routine of an accountant who preferred quiet evenings over crowded rooms. Meeting Lisa felt like a second chance I hadn't expected. For years, I believed our life together was simple and honest. Then one night, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about my own marriage. It was close to midnight when I sat at the dining table sorting through a stack of old documents. Most of it was ordinary paperwork. Tax records, insurance forms, envelopes that had collected dust over time. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into a suburban neighborhood long after everyone has gone to sleep. I remember feeling tired and distracted, the way people often do when they are going through paperwork they barely want to look at. That was when I noticed an envelope I didn't recognize. It had the stamp of a county courthouse on the front, and it looked older than the rest of the papers around it. At first I assumed it had something to do with property records or routine filings, but when I opened it and pulled out the document inside, something about it immediately made my hands stop moving. It was a marriage certificate. At first my mind didn't process what I was seeing. The document was official, stamped with the seal of a county clerk's office, printed in the same format used for legal records across the United States. My eyes moved slowly across the page, reading the names, the date, the signatures, and then I saw something that made my chest tighten. The name of the bride was Lisa Peterson, my wife. The date on the certificate stopped me even more. It was 3 years after the day Lisa and I had already been married. I remember staring at that document for a long time, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood something. But the detail that truly made the room feel smaller was the name printed beside hers. The husband listed on that certificate was not me. For a moment, I honestly believed it had to be a mistake. Maybe there was another woman with the same name. Maybe it was a clerical error from the courthouse. Maybe the document had been placed in the wrong envelope. But the longer I looked at it, the harder it became to explain away what was sitting in my hands. The signatures were real. The date was clear. And the address listed beside Lisa's name was the same house we were living in. My mind began searching through years of memories, replaying conversations and small moments that once seemed ordinary. Suddenly, every quiet weekend, every unexplained work trip, every time Lisa stepped outside to take a phone call began to feel different. That night I realized something I never imagined I would have to question. The woman I believed I knew better than anyone might have been living a life I had never seen. What happened next would slowly turn my ordinary marriage into a mystery that took months to understand. Because once I started looking closer, I found things I had never noticed before. Old photographs that raised new questions. Emails that didn't make sense. Documents that suggested Lisa had been careful about what parts of her life she allowed me to see. And somewhere within all of it, there was another man whose name kept appearing beside hers. A man named Daniel Carter. At the time, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he lived. I didn't know how long he had been part of Lisa's life. All I knew was that the marriage certificate in my hands suggested something impossible. Somehow, my wife appeared to be married to someone else. Before we go any deeper into the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We always love hearing from viewers across the country and around the world. And if you enjoy real stories that uncover hidden truths and complicated lives, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what I discovered after that night would slowly unravel a secret that had been hidden for years. And by the time the truth finally came out, it would involve another husband, another family, and a reality I never expected to face. This is the story of how I discovered my wife's secret marriage. For 6 years, I believed I was happily married. My name is Mark Peterson. I was 52 years old at the time this story began, an accountant living a quiet life in Ohio. I had already been through one painful divorce earlier in my life, so when I met Lisa Peterson I believed I had finally found something steady and honest. Lisa had a way of making people feel comfortable almost immediately. She was warm without trying too hard, thoughtful in small ways that felt genuine, and calm in a way that balanced my naturally cautious personality. When we married, I truly believed we were building a peaceful life together. We lived in a modest suburban neighborhood where the streets were quiet at night and neighbors recognized each other's cars in the driveway. Our evenings were simple. Sometimes we cooked dinner together, sometimes we watched television, and sometimes we sat outside on the back patio talking about ordinary things like work, family, and future plans. Holidays were spent visiting relatives or hosting small gatherings where Lisa's laughter always seemed to fill the room. From the outside, there was nothing unusual about our life. Friends described us as a stable couple. People said we seemed happy together. And for a long time, I believed the same thing. Lisa often described herself as someone who valued privacy, which I respected because I was the same way. She didn't share every detail about her past, but neither did I. We both had histories that included mistakes and disappointments, and our understanding was simple. The past stayed in the past while we focused on building something better together. That agreement made our relationship feel mature and uncomplicated. When Lisa traveled occasionally for work, I never questioned it because her job involved project coordination for regional companies that sometimes required meetings in nearby states. She would pack a small suitcase, kiss me goodbye, and promise to call once she arrived. Sometimes she returned with small souvenirs from the towns she visited, things like coffee mugs or postcards that she jokingly said proved she had actually gone to those meetings. Looking back now, those little details feel different, but at the time they were simply part of the rhythm of our lives. I had no reason to suspect anything unusual because nothing in Lisa's behavior ever suggested she was hiding something so serious that it would eventually shake the foundation of our entire marriage. That was the life I believed I had built with Lisa Peterson. A quiet home, peaceful evenings, and the comforting idea that after years of disappointment, I had finally found a partner who understood me. But everything changed because of one discovery made on an ordinary night while sorting through old paperwork. That single document forced me to ask questions I never imagined I would need to ask about my own marriage. Was Lisa secretly married to another man? Was the life I believed we were living together only one version of a much larger story? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all was how long something like that could have been happening without me realizing it. The thought alone felt impossible, yet the evidence sitting on that dining table said otherwise. What I didn't realize at the time was that my wife had been hiding something for years, something so carefully managed that it remained invisible inside the routine of our daily life. The truth I was beginning to uncover would eventually lead me to a man whose existence I had never known about, a man who believed he was Lisa's husband as well. And when our paths finally crossed, both of us would realize that the woman we trusted most had connected our lives in a way neither of us could have imagined. Before Lisa Peterson entered my life, I had already learned how complicated relationships could become. My first marriage ended after nearly 12 years, and the divorce was not the kind that fades quietly into the past. It left behind a long period of adjustment, the kind where you slowly rebuild routines and try to convince yourself that life can still feel stable again. By the time I turned 46, I had reached a point where I wasn't actively looking for another relationship. My focus was work, maintaining a quiet routine, and keeping my expectations low when it came to romance. As an accountant in Ohio, my days were predictable. I spent most of my time at the office reviewing financial statements, preparing reports, and helping small businesses manage their taxes. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was peaceful. I had a small house, a few close friends, and a routine that kept everything orderly. Love was not something I expected to find again, especially not in a way that would change my life so completely. That was the state of mind I was in the day I met Lisa Peterson. It happened in a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, the kind of place where people sit quietly with laptops or newspapers while waiting for the weather to pass. I remember noticing her because she was sitting alone at a table near the window, reading a paperback novel and occasionally glancing outside at the rain. There was something calm about the way she carried herself, something that made the entire moment feel ordinary and comfortable at the same time. We ended up speaking because the barista accidentally switched our orders. It started as a simple conversation about the mix-up, but it continued longer than either of us expected. Lisa had an easy way of talking to people. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and never rushed a conversation. Within minutes, we were discussing everything from work to the quiet rhythm of living in a Midwestern city where life moved at a slower pace than the larger coastal states. That afternoon turned into the beginning of something I had not anticipated. Over the next several weeks, we met again for coffee, then for dinner, then for long walks through parks where conversations seemed to stretch for hours without effort. What I remember most about those early months was how Lisa made me feel understood in a way I had not experienced in years. After my divorce, I had grown used to keeping certain thoughts to myself, assuming that most people wouldn't be interested in hearing about the ordinary struggles that come with rebuilding a life after a relationship ends. But Lisa listened without judgment. She asked about my work, my past, my family, and the experiences that shaped the person I had become. In return, she shared parts of her own story, though not always in great detail. She talked about growing up in different cities because her parents moved frequently for work. She mentioned having relatives she didn't stay in close contact with and described her family history as complicated. At the time, I didn't consider that unusual. Many people carry complicated family histories, and it never occurred to me that those brief explanations might hide something more significant. Lisa was intelligent, thoughtful, and affectionate in ways that felt genuine. She remembered small details about my life and often surprised me with gestures that showed she paid attention to what I said. If I mentioned a book I enjoyed, she would find it and read it so we could talk about it later. If I mentioned a restaurant I had always wanted to try, she would suggest going there the following weekend. Those small acts built a sense of closeness that felt natural and reassuring. For 2 years we dated, and during that time I never saw any reason to question the life Lisa presented to me. She seemed open about her daily routines and honest about her work responsibilities. Occasionally she would travel for meetings or projects connected to her job, but those trips were always explained in simple terms. She never appeared nervous about them, and she always returned with stories about the cities she had visited or the people she had met during those meetings. Our relationship slowly deepened until marriage became the next logical step in the life we were building together. When I asked Lisa to marry me, she accepted with a quiet smile that felt sincere and heartfelt. We didn't plan a large ceremony. In fact, the wedding was intentionally small. Lisa explained that she preferred something simple and private, partly because she wasn't close with many relatives. She described her extended family as complicated and said that keeping the ceremony small would avoid unnecessary tension. I didn't question that explanation because it matched the reserved personality she had shown since the day we met. The wedding took place at a small local venue with only a handful of close friends present. It was peaceful, understated, and exactly the kind of ceremony that suited the quiet life we both seemed to value. Afterward, we returned home to the same routines that had defined our relationship from the beginning. We cooked dinner together, watched movies on quiet weekends, and planned occasional trips when our schedules allowed. Everything about our marriage appeared stable and genuine. I believed I had found a partner who valued honesty, privacy, and emotional connection as much as I did. Looking back now, I realized there were small details that might have deserved more attention. Lisa rarely spoke about her family beyond vague descriptions. She avoided long conversations about her childhood, often redirecting the topic back to the present. At the time, I interpreted that as a sign of someone who simply preferred to leave painful memories behind. I respected that boundary because I believed every person had the right to keep certain parts of their past private. The truth is that I never imagined those quiet gaps in her story might hide something far more complicated than I could see. Looking back today, after everything that eventually unfolded, I often think about those early conversations and the subtle moments where Lisa chose not to share certain details about her life. At the time, I viewed those moments as ordinary expressions of privacy. But with the clarity that only comes after the truth emerges, it is difficult not to wonder whether those quiet omissions were the earliest signs that something important was missing from the story she told me. And when I reflect on those early years now, one thought returns again and again with unsettling clarity. Looking back, that might have been the first red flag. The night everything changed began in the most ordinary way possible, which is perhaps document carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. For a moment I considered confronting her immediately, walking into the living room with the certificate in my hand and demanding an explanation. But when the front door opened and Lisa stepped inside carrying her handbag and car keys, something inside me hesitated. She greeted me in the same calm tone she used every evening, asking if I had finished organizing the paperwork and telling me that the meeting had gone longer than expected. I looked at her face while she spoke, searching for some sign that she knew what I had just discovered. But her expression appeared completely normal. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and began talking about an upcoming project at work as if nothing unusual had happened at all. In that moment, I realized something important. If I confronted her immediately, I might lose the chance to understand what was really happening. The possibility that Lisa had secretly married another man named Daniel Carter was too serious to approach without knowing more. So instead of asking questions, I remained quiet. I nodded occasionally while she spoke and continued pretending to sort through the papers on the table. The envelope containing the marriage certificate remained hidden beneath a stack of financial records where she couldn't see it. Later that night, after Lisa had gone upstairs and the house had grown quiet again, I returned to the dining table and unfolded the document once more. I examined every detail carefully, from the courthouse seal to the signatures and the date of the ceremony. Everything appeared authentic. That realization forced me to consider something I had never imagined about my own marriage. If Lisa Peterson had legally married a man named Daniel Carter while she was already married to me, then the life I believed we shared together might only represent one part of a much larger story. The thought was difficult to accept, yet the evidence sitting in front of me left very little room for doubt. I knew then that the only way to understand the truth was to investigate quietly before confronting Lisa with what I had found. Over the next several hours, I began reviewing other documents in the cabinet, searching for anything that might provide additional context. Travel receipts, archived emails, and old photographs suddenly seemed far more significant than they had ever seemed before. Each new piece of information raised more questions than answers, and with every discovery the situation began to feel more complicated than I had first imagined. By the time the clock on the kitchen wall showed nearly 2 in the morning, I had reached a conclusion that filled me with a deep sense of unease. The marriage certificate might only be the beginning, and what I discovered next made things even worse. After finding the marriage certificate that listed Daniel Carter as Lisa Peterson's husband, I knew I could not ignore the possibility that something deeply troubling was unfolding inside my own life. Confronting Lisa immediately felt like the wrong move because I had only one document and a growing number of questions. If there was an explanation, I needed to understand it fully before revealing what I knew. That night, I opened my laptop at the dining table and began searching the name printed on the certificate. Daniel Carter. At first, the search results showed several men with the same name scattered across different states. It took patience to narrow the results, comparing locations and details that might connect to Lisa's occasional trips for work. Eventually, I found a profile on Facebook that caught my attention immediately. The account belonged to a man named Daniel Carter who lived in Indiana, the same state listed on the courthouse document. His profile photo showed him standing outside what appeared to be a park on a sunny afternoon. At first, nothing about the picture seemed unusual, but when I opened the photo gallery attached to his profile, I felt my stomach tighten in a way that is difficult to describe. One photograph appeared near the top of the page, posted only a few months earlier. In the picture, Daniel Carter was standing beside Lisa Peterson. My wife was smiling with the same relaxed expression I had seen countless times at family gatherings and holiday dinners. Her arm rested comfortably against his shoulder while he held the camera at an angle that suggested the photo had been taken during a celebration or special occasion. Below the image was a short caption written in casual, affectionate language. It read, "Happy Anniversary," followed by a heart emoji. I stared at the screen for several seconds, trying to convince myself there must be some misunderstanding. But there was no mistaking the person standing beside Daniel Carter in that photograph. It was Lisa Peterson, the woman I had been married to for 6 years. In that moment, it felt as if the room around me had gone completely silent. The quiet house, the soft hum of appliances in the kitchen, Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to fade into the background, while one realization settled heavily in my mind. The marriage certificate I had found earlier was not an isolated mistake. It was connected to a real person who clearly believed he was celebrating an anniversary with my wife. It felt like my world collapsed in the span of a few seconds. I spent the next several hours examining Daniel Carter's social media page carefully, scrolling through years of photographs and posts that slowly formed a timeline I had never imagined existed. Many of the images included Lisa Peterson, sometimes attending events, sometimes posing beside Daniel in places that looked like parks, restaurants, or small family gatherings. What disturbed me most was the pattern that began to emerge as I compared the dates of those photographs with my own memories of the same time periods. On several occasions, Lisa had told me she needed to travel for work during those weekends. She would pack her suitcase on Friday morning and return Sunday evening, explaining that her meetings required her to stay overnight in another city. Now those same weekends appeared in Daniel Carter's photographs as anniversaries, dinners, and casual moments shared between a husband and wife. I began writing down the dates of those posts, comparing them to entries in our household calendar and old email confirmations for her trips. The more I looked, the clearer the timeline became. Lisa Peterson had been married to Daniel Carter for 3 years while she was already married to me. 2 husbands. 2 separate lives unfolding at the same time without either of us realizing the other existed. The realization forced me to examine every small detail of the past several years. Weekends she described as work travel suddenly looked like carefully scheduled visits with another household. Phone calls she sometimes took in another room began to feel less like ordinary privacy and more like conversations meant to remain hidden. Even moments when she appeared distracted or distant now carried a different meaning. Evidence continued stacking up as I searched deeper into archived emails and travel receipts. There were hotel bookings that matched the cities where Daniel Carter lived. There were credit card charges from restaurants I had never heard her mention before. Slowly, piece by piece, a picture began to form that was almost impossible to accept. Lisa Peterson had been living 2 separate marriages, maintaining each one carefully enough that neither man suspected the other existed. For several days, I kept this discovery entirely to myself. I watched Lisa move through our daily routines as if nothing unusual had happened. She made coffee in the morning, discussed her work schedule, and asked about my day in the same relaxed tone she had always used. Each ordinary moment felt strangely surreal because I was now aware of a life she shared somewhere else with a man named Daniel Carter. Eventually, I realized that speculation and online searches would never provide the clarity I needed. If Daniel Carter truly believed Lisa was his wife, then he deserved to know the truth as much as I did. The decision to contact him was not easy. I spent nearly an entire evening debating whether reaching out would create more confusion than answers. But curiosity and a growing sense of responsibility pushed me forward. I sent him a short message through social media introducing myself and asking if we could meet to discuss something important related to Lisa Peterson. I did not explain everything in the message because the situation felt too complicated to summarize in a few sentences. To my surprise, Daniel responded the following day with cautious curiosity, agreeing to meet at a small diner located halfway between our 2 cities. When the day arrived, I drove there with a mixture of anxiety and determination that made the entire trip feel longer than it actually was. The diner was quiet when I arrived, the kind of roadside place where truck drivers and travelers stop for coffee and breakfast. Daniel Carter walked in a few minutes later. I recognized him immediately from the photographs I had seen online. He approached the table politely and introduced himself, clearly confused about why a stranger wanted to meet with him. We exchanged a few brief words about the drive before I explained that the reason for the meeting involved Lisa Peterson. The moment I mentioned her name, Daniel looked puzzled but not alarmed. Then he said something that sent a chill through the conversation. "You must be mistaken," he said calmly. "Lisa is my wife." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The words hung in the air between us like something fragile that neither man fully understood yet. I reached into the folder I had brought with me and removed the marriage certificate I had discovered days earlier. Without saying another word, I slid the document across the table toward him. Daniel picked it up slowly and began reading the details printed on the page. I watched his expression change as he recognized Lisa Peterson's name beside my own address listed as part of the evidence I had gathered. The color drained from his face as the reality of the situation began to settle in. The silence that followed was heavy with the same realization forming in both of our minds. That was the moment we understood something neither of us had ever considered before. We were not enemies or rivals competing for the same woman. We were two men who had both believed we were married to Lisa Peterson. And in that quiet diner, staring at a single document that connected our lives in the most unexpected way, we realized something that changed everything we thought we knew. We were both victims. After the silence settled between us in that small diner, Daniel Carter and I began talking in a way that neither of us ever expected. At first, the conversation moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if we were both afraid that saying too much might somehow make the situation even more real than it already felt. Daniel explained how he met Lisa Peterson several years earlier during a charity event in Indiana. According to him, she had been attending a conference nearby and had joined a community fundraiser that weekend. They spoke for hours that night, and within a few months their relationship became serious. As Daniel described those early moments, I noticed something unsettling. The timeline he was describing overlapped almost perfectly with the period when Lisa and I were already married. While he talked, I began sharing my own story with him, explaining how Lisa and I had met years earlier in Ohio, how we dated for 2 years before getting married, and how our life together had appeared calm and stable from the very beginning. The more we spoke, the clearer the pattern became. Every detail lined up with a precision that neither of us could ignore. When Daniel mentioned the weekends Lisa often spent with him in Indiana, I recognized those same dates as the weekends she told me she was traveling for work. When I described evenings she claimed to be attending meetings in nearby cities, Daniel remembered those same nights as dinners they shared together. Slowly, piece by piece, the two versions of Lisa Peterson's life merged into a single, shocking reality. She had carefully separated her time between two different states, maintaining two marriages that existed only a few hours apart but never crossed paths. Each of us had been given a believable explanation for her travel, and each explanation allowed the other life to continue without suspicion. Listening to Daniel speak about his experiences felt like looking at a reflection of my own memories from a different angle. The same affectionate messages, the same thoughtful gestures, the same reassuring conversations about the future had been shared with both of us. In that moment, it became impossible to deny what had happened. Lisa Peterson had engineered a perfect double life. Daniel and I sat in that diner for nearly 2 hours comparing dates, photographs, and messages stored on our phones. With every new detail we shared, the truth became harder to ignore. Lisa had maintained separate routines in each city. In Ohio, she was my wife who worked long hours and occasionally traveled for professional meetings. In Indiana, she was Daniel Carter's wife who had a flexible job that sometimes required visits to neighboring states. Each explanation allowed her to move freely between two households without raising suspicion. She had carefully arranged her schedule so that holidays and family gatherings rarely overlapped. When I hosted Thanksgiving at my house, Daniel remembered spending Christmas with her a few weeks later. When Daniel celebrated an anniversary dinner with her in Indiana, I remembered the same weekend as one of her supposed work conferences. The precision of the arrangement was difficult to comprehend. It required careful planning, constant communication, and an ability to maintain two emotional connections at the same time without revealing the truth to either person. The longer Daniel and I talked, the more we realized that every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Lisa had not simply made a mistake or allowed one relationship to fade before starting another. She had deliberately chosen to live two separate marriages at the same time. Once we understood that, the question we both faced was what to do next. Neither of us wanted to continue living in uncertainty. The only person who could explain how this situation had happened was Lisa herself. Eventually, Daniel suggested something that felt uncomfortable but necessary. Instead of confronting her separately, we would face her together. That way there would be no opportunity for confusion, no chance for her to offer different explanations to each of us. The truth would have to come out in one moment. 2 days later, we drove together to the house I shared with Lisa in Ohio. The entire drive felt strangely quiet, as if both of us were still trying to process the reality that had connected our lives in such an unexpected way. When we arrived, Daniel remained beside me on the front walkway while I rang the doorbell. Inside the house, I could hear footsteps approaching the door. When it opened, Lisa Peterson appeared exactly as she had countless times before, wearing a calm expression that suggested she expected to see only me standing outside. But the moment her eyes moved past my shoulder and recognized Daniel Carter standing beside me, her entire expression changed. Her face dropped instantly, and for several seconds she said nothing at all. The silence between the three of us felt heavy with understanding. In that moment, Lisa Peterson knew the secret she had carried for years was over. None of us moved for a while. Daniel looked at her with disbelief, while I watched her searching our faces as if she were trying to measure how much we already knew. Finally, she stepped aside and quietly invited us inside the house. We sat in the living room where she usually spent quiet evenings reading or watching television. But that familiar space now felt completely different. The calm environment that once represented our life together had become the setting for a truth that could no longer remain hidden. Lisa looked from Daniel to me and then back again before speaking. Her voice was steady but quieter than usual as she admitted what we had already begun to understand. She told us that everything we suspected was true. She had married Daniel Carter while still legally married to me. She explained that her relationship with Daniel began unexpectedly during one of her work trips, at a time when she felt uncertain about many parts of her life. What began as a friendship eventually became something more serious. Instead of ending one relationship before beginning another, she convinced herself she could manage both without causing harm. According to Lisa, she cared deeply for both of us in different ways. She described feeling emotionally attached to the life she had built with me in Ohio while also feeling a strong connection with Daniel in Indiana. She admitted that at first she believed the situation would eventually resolve itself, that one relationship would naturally fade or that circumstances would force her to make a choice. But as time passed, she found herself unable to walk away from either life. The result was a complicated arrangement where she divided her time carefully between two households, maintaining separate explanations and schedules that allowed both marriages to continue. Listening to her describe it felt surreal. It was difficult to understand how someone could carry such a complex secret for so long without revealing the truth even once. Lisa lowered her eyes while speaking, acknowledging that every explanation she gave us sounded inadequate compared to the reality we were now facing. She admitted she had been afraid of losing both relationships if the truth ever surfaced, so she convinced herself that continuing the arrangement was easier than confronting the consequences. For a long moment, none of us spoke after she finished explaining. The room felt unusually quiet as the weight of her confession settled in. But just when it seemed like everything had finally been revealed, Lisa lifted her head again and looked at both of us with an expression that suggested there was still more we did not know. Then she said something that changed the direction of the entire conversation. "There's something else you don't know." And the moment those words left her mouth, Daniel and I realized that the story we thought we had finally understood might still hold another secret waiting to be revealed. When Lisa Peterson said there was something else we didn't know, the room fell into a silence that felt heavier than anything we had already heard that day. Daniel Carter and I exchanged a brief glance, both of us trying to prepare ourselves for whatever explanation she was about to give. By that point, we believed we had already uncovered the most shocking part of the story. We had learned that Lisa had been living two marriages at the same time, maintaining separate homes and separate routines for years without either of us realizing it. It was difficult to imagine what else could possibly remain hidden after that confession. But when Lisa finally spoke again, her voice carried a weight that immediately told us the truth was far more complicated than we had realized. She looked directly at Daniel first, then slowly turned toward me as if measuring how her words would land once they were spoken. She told us that the situation between the three of us was not the only secret she had been carrying. During the time she was married to Daniel Carter in Indiana, their relationship had grown deeper in ways that neither of us had discussed yet. Then she said something that caused the entire room to fall silent again. She told us that she and Daniel had a child together. For a moment, I didn't fully understand what she meant. The words seemed simple enough, yet they carried a meaning that took several seconds to process. Lisa explained that 3 years earlier, not long after her second marriage to Daniel Carter, she gave birth to a son. The child was now a toddler living primarily in Indiana with Daniel's extended family helping with childcare, while Lisa traveled back and forth between states. As she spoke, the timeline that had already shocked me began rearranging itself once again. During the months when she claimed to be traveling for work conferences, she had actually been visiting the child she shared with Daniel. Some of the long weekends that once seemed like ordinary business trips had in fact been spent with her son. I felt a wave of realization move through me as small details from the past resurfaced in my memory. I remembered a time when Lisa had suddenly extended one of her work trips by several days, explaining that the project she was managing required additional meetings. At the time, I believed her explanation without hesitation. Now I understood that those extra days were likely spent with the child I had never known existed. In that moment, the betrayal felt deeper than anything I had imagined when I first discovered the marriage certificate weeks earlier. The secret was no longer just about two marriages existing at the same time. It was about an entire part of Lisa's life that had remained completely invisible to me for years. Daniel Carter reacted differently when he heard Lisa confirm the existence of their child in front of me. For him, the child was already a central part of his life. But seeing the situation through my eyes seemed to affect him deeply. He explained that he had always believed Lisa traveled frequently because her job required her presence in multiple cities. He had never suspected that those trips involved returning to a husband in another state. As the truth settled around the three of us, it became clear that the consequences of Lisa's decisions would reach far beyond the moment we were experiencing in that living room. Bigamy is not only a betrayal of personal trust, but also a serious legal issue. Once the situation came to light, legal professionals became involved almost immediately. Both marriages required formal proceedings to dissolve because they had been recognized by different state jurisdictions. The legal process that followed was complicated and emotionally exhausting. Lawyers examined timelines, documents, and financial records to determine how the marriages had been registered and which actions violated state law. Eventually, the case attracted the attention of local authorities who confirmed that maintaining two legal marriages at the same time constituted a criminal offense in several states, including the ones involved in our situation. Bigamy charges were considered as the courts reviewed the evidence surrounding Lisa Peterson's actions. While the legal process moved forward, the personal consequences spread through our families and communities in ways that none of us could control. Friends who once believed our marriage was stable began asking questions they struggled to understand. Relatives on both sides of the situation reacted with disbelief, anger, and sadness as they learned how long the secret had existed. Daniel Carter focused on protecting the well-being of his child, making sure the situation did not disrupt the stability of the young life that depended on him. As for me, the months that followed were filled with difficult conversations, legal appointments, and long periods of reflection about the life I had believed I was living. Eventually, both marriages ended through formal divorce proceedings. Daniel and I remained in occasional contact during that period, not because we shared a friendship in the traditional sense, but because we had both experienced the same unexpected disruption in our lives. There was a strange understanding between us that few other people could truly appreciate. We had both trusted the same person completely, and we had both discovered that the story we believed about our relationships was only part of a much larger truth. Over time, each of us moved forward in different ways. Daniel dedicated his energy to raising his child and rebuilding a life centered around that responsibility. I returned to the quiet routines of my work as an accountant, focusing on stability and the familiar structure of daily life. But the experience left a lasting impression that changed the way I viewed trust and relationships. Years later, when I look back on the events that unfolded after I discovered that single document at my dining table, the hardest part was never just the lies themselves. The hardest part was realizing how easily trust can be manipulated when someone is determined to maintain a story that others want to believe. Lisa Peterson had not simply told a few small lies to avoid difficult conversations. She had constructed an entire second life that existed alongside the one I shared with her, and she managed to maintain both for years without revealing the truth. Understanding how that happened forced me to examine my own assumptions about relationships and the way people present themselves to the world. It also reminded me that the truth, no matter how carefully it is hidden, eventually finds its way into the light. Sometimes it appears through a simple accident, like a document discovered in an envelope that was never meant to be opened. Other times it emerges through the persistence of questions that refuse to disappear. In my case, it arrived quietly on an ordinary night when I was simply organizing paperwork at the dining table. That moment changed everything I believed about the life I was living. Some secrets destroy relationships. Others destroy entire lives. The story of Mark Peterson, Lisa Peterson, and Daniel Carter became a reminder that the choices people make in private can ripple outward in ways they never expect. Trust, once broken in such a profound way, rarely returns to what it once was. Yet even in situations where deception lasts for years, the truth eventually surfaces through the smallest of details. A document, a photograph, a conversation between strangers can reveal realities that remained hidden for a long time. Looking back now, one question still lingers whenever I think about the path that led to that discovery. Would you have noticed the warning signs? After everything that happened between Mark Peterson, Lisa Peterson, and Daniel Carter, the story eventually settled into memory, but the questions surrounding it never truly disappeared. When people hear a story like this, the first reaction is usually disbelief. It sounds like the kind of situation that belongs in a dramatic film rather than an ordinary neighborhood in Ohio and Indiana. Yet the truth is that lives can become far more complicated than they appear from the outside. For years, Mark Peterson believed he was living a stable and honest life with Lisa Peterson. Daniel Carter believed the same thing in another city, building a home and raising a child with the woman he trusted completely. Neither man had any idea that their lives were quietly connected by a secret that lasted for years before finally coming into the open. When the truth surfaced, it forced everyone involved to face difficult questions about trust, honesty, and the way people manage the stories they tell about themselves. Even now, long after the legal proceedings and emotional fallout settled, the story continues to raise the same unsettling thought for anyone who hears it. What do you think? Could someone really live two marriages at the same time without being caught for so long? It sounds almost impossible at first, yet the evidence in this case showed that careful planning, believable explanations, and a willingness to maintain separate identities allowed Lisa Peterson to keep two different lives running side by side. Mark Peterson lived in Ohio believing his marriage was stable and sincere. Daniel Carter lived in Indiana believing he had built a family with the same woman. Neither of them saw the full picture until a single document forced the truth into the open. When people hear this story, they often react in different ways depending on which part of the situation resonates most with them. Some people feel the deepest sympathy for Mark Peterson because he spent years trusting a marriage that was never what it appeared to be. Others feel a strong sense of concern for Daniel Carter because he discovered that the woman raising a child with him had been dividing her life between two households. Still others focus on the complicated position of the child, who became part of a story shaped by decisions made long before he could understand them. Situations like this rarely have simple answers, which is why they often stay in people's minds long after the story ends. So we want to hear from you. Who do you feel worse for in this situation, Mark Peterson or Daniel Carter? Both men believed they were building a life with Lisa Peterson, yet both discovered that the reality of their marriages was very different from what they had imagined. Some viewers believe Mark suffered the deeper betrayal because he had no idea another family existed. Others believe Daniel faced the greater challenge because his child would grow up connected to a complicated past created by someone else's choices. There is also another difficult question that often comes up when stories like this become public. Should Lisa Peterson have faced jail time for living two marriages at the same time? Bigamy is considered a serious legal offense in many states, yet cases like this sometimes end in ways that focus more on resolving the marriages legally rather than pursuing long criminal trials. People who follow stories involving deception often disagree strongly about what justice should look like in situations where personal relationships and legal boundaries collide. And there is one more question that many viewers ask themselves after hearing the full story. If you had been in Mark Peterson's position, would you have noticed the warning signs earlier? When you look back at the details now, there were moments that seem easier to question with hindsight. Lisa Peterson avoided long conversations about her family history. She traveled frequently for work. She kept parts of her schedule private and maintained connections in another state that Mark rarely questioned. Yet when those details were happening in real time, they appeared ordinary enough that they did not immediately raise suspicion. That is often the most unsettling part of stories like this. When deception is carefully managed, it can blend easily into the routines of everyday life. Stories like the one involving Mark Peterson, Lisa Peterson, and Daniel Carter remind us that human relationships are often far more complicated than they appear on the surface. The trust we place in the people closest to us is one of the most powerful forces shaping our lives. When that trust is broken in a way that crosses legal and emotional boundaries, the consequences can ripple outward for years. Yet these stories also reveal something else about human nature. No matter how carefully a secret is protected, it rarely remains hidden forever. Sometimes the truth appears in dramatic ways, but more often it emerges through small moments that seem insignificant at first. In this case, the discovery began with an ordinary envelope inside a stack of tax documents. That single piece of paper forced two men to confront a reality they had never imagined, and it eventually revealed a hidden life that had existed quietly between two states for years. If the story surprised you, you are not alone. Many people are fascinated by true stories that reveal how complicated real life can become when secrets remain hidden for too long. And if you think this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear what happened in our next case. There are many real stories out there that challenge our assumptions about trust, loyalty, and the lives people build behind closed doors. Some of them are even more shocking than the one you just heard. If you enjoy exploring real stories that are stranger than fiction, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because sometimes the truth about ordinary lives turns out to be far more extraordinary than anyone expects.